All right, hello, welcome everyone. My name is Amy Allen. I'm the president of the Social Science Education Consortium, and I'm happy to welcome you today to the first of 3 workshops sponsored by SSEC about AI in the social sciences. Today's workshop focuses on ways to not only integrate, but also critically evaluate the use of generative AI in history education, and it will be led by David Hicks. David is a professor of history and social science at Virginia Tech, and I'll drop a link to his full bio in the chat. He would be the first to tell you he does not consider himself to be an expert in AI. However, he has spent many hours learning about generative AI, experimenting with its capabilities, and thinking about its application to history education. It is possible that he has spent more time playing with ChatGPT than he has on TikTok, and that is saying a lot. Today, you all get to benefit from the hundreds of hours he has spent experimenting as he shares both highlights and cautions at the intersection of AI and history ed. Just a few notes about the format of today's workshop before I turn things over to David. While David is presenting, the chat feature will be available and you can post questions in the chat. In some cases, I might reply to the chat, I might interrupt David for clarification, or I might make a note of your question and save it for the Q&A. The session is scheduled to last for 90 minutes, and we do plan to take time to engage with your questions at the end of the session. If for some reason you need to leave, the session is being recorded, and it will be posted to the SSEC YouTube channel as a resource. Also, all of the attendees will get an access to a folder of resources that David developed in conjunction with this topic following the session. So again, welcome, and now I will turn things over to David to get started.
You're muted, David. We can't hear you.
So I really don't know how to use technology, and I've got no idea what I'm doing. So no, what I said was really funny initially when I was muted. But I did say to Amy, I said, I really not sure how qualified I am to talk about Gen AI. And she said, this day and age, do you really need to be qualified? This is not a cabinet hearing, Pete. Carry on. But my name's David, so I don't know what she was talking about. Anyway, so the first thing I did was I wanted to I asked ChatGPT to really quickly create a kind of a spectrum of users, thinking about who the audience is. So I typed in the idea of like there's going to be people who maybe don't know a lot about AI. There may be people who have played with it a little bit in their personal and professional lives. There may be somebody who sat there, or like 2 or 3 people go, I already teach this. I'm just trying to look at this idiot and see what he does, so I know more than him. And then I didn't like the first image, so then I thought, well, it's history educators, so I'm really going to ask about, can I have a diverse group of history educators and then a spectrum? And again, I know we're in a different era, and this may be the diversity that some people want, but if you actually look at the diverse group we've got here, we might have questions about Chatty Jeeps's visions of diversity already. This is my agenda. We are going to look around and try to make a bit of sense of Gen AI. I know there's other people who are going to come in later and talk about it. So I felt like I needed to talk a little bit about what I think it is and what's out there. I am then going to kind of talk a little bit about my playing with it, my positioning, my conversations, my early travels a bit. And that's when you get to see how limited my view is. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some trepidations, missteps, and monsters. Then I'm going to start talking a lot about the kind of prompt work I've been doing, the conversation starters that I think is really important when you balance history literacy and Gen AI literacy. And then I'm going to share some custom GPTs and hopefully get through a number of demos of me working with really a custom GPT or a couple of them to kind of get to kind of think about historical skills and how teachers and students could use them and to facilitate. As Amy mentioned, there is going to be in Google, there's some stuff to look at, including demos, baby podcasts, and the PowerPoint. So Gen AI, looking out and just kind of feeling and trying to get my head around this and understand what the heck's going on. if many of you have probably already experienced it, it's in the news, it's everywhere. There's books, there's guides, there's people telling you what to do, and it's quite overwhelming as you go. You then get all this information about. I've got some friends well, I don't have any friends really. Well, I've got some colleagues, and they say, "Oh, have you heard this? Have you seen this? My school's talking about piloting this." And then I have colleagues who send me stuff like Dan Fitzpatrick, a new prompt framework that brings to life historical and literary characters for your students. So there's lots of stuff going on. And then at the same time, when there's that kind of excitement and it's coming, these all pop up, and these come from a university in Ireland and UCD College of Arts, Dublin. And if you look around, there's that sense of fear and foreboding, the ethics. When should you use it? What are the risks? And many of you are probably, depending on your positions, are concerned whether how your students are using it, what they're using it for, and really worried about cheating and things like that. Some of you might feel a little bit like this. This is Ezra Klein, and he wrote January 12th. As I was writing these paragraphs, I asked ChatGPT for 3 or 4 questions. They were small queries, kind of thing. And what he does in here, he kind of talks about over the last few months, AI has kind of got more sophisticated, and it's now layered into his everyday world in a way. And that's not necessarily me, but he uses it for search engines. It's totally layered in. At the same time, he's balancing a recognition of the environmental impact of using it in terms of the data centers, the amount of energy that it's using, and things like that. So there's this dichotomy between there's this thing out there that people are using, but the cost in multiple ways, not just financial, but to the environment, is there as well. So I'm going to pretend a little bit that I know a little bit about generative AI for 2 seconds. I was on at Virginia Tech, we have a group called TLOS, and I was on an AI Summer Fellows program. I thought I was going to learn to have a couple of sessions, but it turned into a 13-week-long nightmare. So, but AI, the rise of it, it's just popped up everywhere. You can see some Chinese ones. You see up here where you see Claude popping up, and it's just boomed, and it continues to boom. And these were certain ones that we use. And then a couple of days ago, we have DeepSeek now pop up. And so that kind of crashed the markets, but we now got DeepSeek here as well. And then what is generative AI? Technical description, as I would say, we've seen AI before in multiple ways. Generative AI is the idea that it takes things together, it has algorithms, and it generates new content. It creates new texts, images, audio based on patterns of existing data. And in that sense, it could actually write essays, create art, compose music based on prompts, and do all sorts of things like that, which is interesting, but also scary unto itself in different ways. Part of the group I was on went out and tried to find as many materials as possible and what they would be good for and what you could use them for. And that's what you can see here is a collection of all the tools that were laying out there and then kind of annotated. And so that was part of one of the experiences of just seeing what's about and recognizing the overwhelming nature of things that are out there. Toolify was a really good site that we came across that actually kind of tries to keep up to date and tells you everything that's out there. This is what I think generative AI is, or I was told this in my meeting. So think about it. It's a type of artificial intelligence that can create new data. Got it. It's trained on using large data sets. Now, different ones are trained in different ways, but they learn patterns to create new and similar data. It is able to generate new, unique outputs on the learned patterns without relying on pre-existing templates. It's capable of producing a wide range of outputs used in a variety of applications. And similar to an overeager and too willing to please intern who will do their best to give you what you want, even if they have nothing really to say at any cost, my opinion. It's a type, generative AI is not, maybe at the moment, a type of AI that is solely focused on imitating or copying existing data. Though there are often copyright issues, and there's just been some new documents about copyright in this era now. It is at the moment, it's not capable of making conscious decisions or creating choices on its own. It's still dependent on the data it was trained on. Though in Anthropic, there has been a report recently written that it actually started trying giving fake answers because it didn't want to change its training patterns. It's not a replacement for human creativity or artistic expression. It's not a solution for every problem. And it's a technology that can create realistic high quality outputs with perfect accuracy every time. No, it can't. Often people talk about hallucinations, which kind of makes them appear human. They just make errors. One of the things I've been messing around with is I was really interested in the difference between ChatGPT and Claude. And this is their self-report, but I asked them about their training models. And so I'm not going to go into that, but you can see it later. But they are trained slightly differently. There is a different ethical framework for Anthropic's Claude to OpenAI. So that's kind of information that I did there. It is a self-report. So, and I was just trying to get my understanding. And then I also wanted to kind of share with you what they say happens when you actually have conversations with them and what you do. And each time they talk about they don't retain the materials, they don't train on the materials that we have, but they do have temporary storage. And that's where sometimes the scariness comes in around issues of if there's going to be a hack. But it's only temporary storage. And so that's the kind of information I wanted to give. Because sometimes people say, well, what happens when you put an article up? Or what happens when you do this? But I still say to be safe, no names of people, especially student data and things like that. I'm very wary of. I just don't do that. I shared that there's so many books out there. I found a little bit more practical at times, Ethan Mollick's work, Co-Intelligence. And I think that concept of co-intelligence and working together, it's not for the stupid. It's not for the young. I did it. I'm kind of influenced by his article here on now is the time for grimoires or spell books. So we're going to share that. So what do I play with and why am I doing this and what have I started with? Well, I'm curious. I was just very curious. I do a lot of work sometimes in technology. I don't see myself either as techno-romantic or techno-skeptic, though in the end you may end up thinking, I'm probably more romantic than skeptic. As a teacher educator, I think if I'm not ready, willing or able to play and see what's going on here, then somebody else will be who will have even less abilities and skills than I do. And they may start making decisions for what goes on in the field of teacher education or history education. Up above are the ones I've been playing with to an extent. I play with ChatGPT. I've played with Claude. I've played with one called Storm, which is at Stanford, which is a different form. I've played with a Google LM notebook. And then on the one side, I've played with Napkin, which is actually basically just an illustrator. So I come to it. This was my Gen AI curiosity. So I'm interested in, can it help student understanding and support historical inquiry and source analysis? Can it facilitate student support? Can it help students who may be ELL or not great readers have access to resources and also start understanding some of the second order concepts of doing history? Can it help them articulate ideas? And can it also model wise practice for us as teacher educators and history educators? And can it help students develop self-regulated learning? Can they get feedback from it? And that's why that's where I'm messing with all the time. I also know that there's ethical concerns, bias, fairness, privacy. A lot of the books that I've been reading that were early on, there's very little talk about access and who has access to it and who doesn't. I know there's also the whole concept of AI literacy and what that means and some of the challenges to that. I think there's economic and social implications. I recognize these concerns over originality and plagiarism and theft, plagiarizing, faking your own work. I am really concerned about the environmental impacts. And then the risks of kind of over-reliance and faking it and using it to get by. And so I'm aware of all those, and they trouble me, and I'm troubled by that even when I'm playing with it. So then I go on and look at TikTok instead. Here's a caveat. This is my great granddad, David Carter, and these are from the book of Habitual Criminals. I think it's dated around 1870s, and he had quite a long list of issues going on. He's done petty theft in Huddersfield. He's stolen 2 horses, 3 glasses, 2 pairs of trousers, and he's stolen a gold watch. And so I think kind of genetically, DNA, I'm not really sure I should be allowed to talk about ethics. And the other issue is I don't always use ChatGPT for good. I have questions, inquiry-based questions, such as what happens to my colleague Todd Ogle in the library when you mix him with a Womble and a Teletubby, and that's what you find out. So I'm also a bully who uses ChatGPT. So there are a number of issues that you need to kind of contextualize as you go. I also have a habit of walking before I can talk. So a colleague and I wrote an article a little bit about self-regulation. Can we use AI to foster self-regulation? And it dropped in civics of technology type of thing. And one of the arguments we were trying to come up with was, if we're going to use ChatGPT to develop self-regulated learning, we need to be explicit with students that they can use ChatGPT to support the assignments and model ways and avenues to do it. So you say, yeah, you can use it, but these are the ways in. We need to think about, can we use it in planning? Can they practice writing the prompts? Can they identify which prompts get them started? Can we allow them to brainstorm with it? So they have some control and choice over what to do, but it may be limited control and choice, like guided inquiry. Do we want them to brainstorm when they're stuck? Check work for veracity, depth, accuracy, identify new references, rework key points for clarity. Again, this is kind of self-regulation, learning to use it as you go within, hopefully, the field of history education. Reflection stage, can they look back on it and decide how helpful it was for them, how could they use it effectively, and what did it do, not to limit, but to enhance their work. So there was a little bit of excitement about it and a belief that there may be pathways in when I first started playing. Though I did end with this quote, or it's not quote, it's me. As teachers continue their journey with AI and navigate new terrain, their initial map-making skills and endeavors into the use of AI to support learning, like the first map makers' representations and sketches themselves, may be somewhat simplistic, flat, or mistaken. And you're going to see some of these later this afternoon. However, these initial ideas can be tested and eventually serve as a basis for more nuanced representations and explicit approaches to use AI to help students become better at learning. Our guarded idealism and willingness to navigate this new terrain, however, does somewhat conjure up Hector Barbossa's warning. You're off the edge of the map here, mate. There may be monsters. So my mate Ben and one of the things I've done is I'm engaged in lots of conversation. And then I thought, oh, this will be funny. I'll say my mate Ben, and everybody will go to Philomena Kunk and know about her mate Paul. And then I thought, well, they might not. So if you don't know, bear with me for one moment, because here's Philomena Kunk.
Of DNA.
Yes.
We all have DNA, or do some of us have D or A, but not both?
No, it's not D and A. It's 3 letters, DNA.
Can you tell by looking at me whether I have DNA?
Well, I know you have DNA because you're a living organism and all life has DNA.
My mate Paul tried to create a new life form by inserting his DNA into a grapefruit, but halfway through the experiment, the greengrocer started hitting him. Why is science so controversial?
So I'm the equivalent of Philomena Kunk when Ben's explaining a little about history education.
When, with where more mundane technology was coming in. And it was exactly the same thing. It was a solution in search of a problem. And we were being told, personalized learning and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you look at, Dan Fitzpatrick is a case in point. He's very typical of people who will sort of say, okay, here are a bunch of prompts you can use with Chat GPT. So one of his activities is things like, okay, you interact with some past figure. And it just completely misses the point that, even 30 years ago, we tended to sort of say Wikipedia, but what we meant was the internet. you know.
Right.
And everyone said, well, nobody in their right mind would say to kids, go on the internet and find out things.
Right.
But actually, that is pretty much what these, you know, I mean, GPT draws on the internet, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he draws. Yeah.
You know, and so when it says interview Nelson Mandela or Winston Churchill or whoever it is, then basically it's just kind of trawling around the internet for these guys. So when you sort of say, what were you trying to do in 1941? Then it's just looking for odd references here and there. And the, you know, well, I think there are two major problems, aren't there? The first one is, what is it drawing on? Three major problems, actually. First of all, what is it drawing on? Secondly, it's, you know, and this I think is arguably the biggest problem, which is is that, you know, what we would ask about Churchill is whether or not his policies were successful or the right policies at the right time, or maybe what the motives were and that sort of thing. And I think most historians would agree that whilst you might read Churchill's memoirs about these sorts of things, you wouldn't sort of say, oh, right, well, there's the answer then.
Yeah.
You know, it's the nature of the beast. It misses out the very point. It treats the history as though as though the past is uncontested.
So there's my mate Ben. These are the things I've used, and we're going to sorry, bouncing around. We've talked about multiple ones of these. I've used Notebook LM, Storm, as you can see there, Napkin, Claude, and Chatty Jeeps. And I wanted to share those kind of ideas as I'm moving through with you a little bit. Storm is interesting really quickly. It is, you only actually put in, it's a research study, but you're literally only allowed to put in 20 words. And so I've actually used it mainly for kind of a research understanding of things I'm not very good at. So strategies for supporting English language learners in social studies. And with Storm, which is at Stanford, you cannot use more than 20 words. Oh, I said that. With another tool. You have to explain why you use it, and then it starts to generate a report. Understanding ELL, value assets, teacher expectations, effective strategies for instruction, and each one's got different footnotes as you go through. I've often found that what you end up getting are quite a few reports. If you look here, it gives you the brainstorming. It's looked up basic right, it's looked up culture. So I wanted to show you that one really quickly.
We get to really explore what doing history actually means.
Yeah.
Forget just memorizing names, dates.
Right.
We are putting on our detective hats today.
I like it.
We've got an awesome lesson plan that's actually designed for students.
Okay.
And a real historical letter from the Great Depression.
Wow.
You'll see how these aren't just, random pieces of the past. They're clues.
Yeah.
That help us understand history.
So what I did here really quickly is I dropped in 3 of my articles around scaffolding, and then it took those, generated frequently asked questions, materials, but it also kind of condensed the notes and then created a podcast or a audio of that. And so I've been screwing around. I'm trying to give you an essence of the kind of things I've been playing with and thinking about how students could use it. It also allows you to actually join in the podcast.
First article, Teaching the Mystery of History. Yeah. It argues that lots of history lessons are just too focused on memorizing facts and figures.
It's true. I mean, we've all probably sat through those classes where oh, hey, our listener wants to join in. What's up?
Well, I was going to ask if you think that's really true. Is history kind of flat in general?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it's actually a really common perception, and it's something this article directly addresses.
It's like his first article.
So you get the idea of some of the stuff that's bubbling around. But, Ethan Molick was pushing the Google, the NPR-like discussion. But this time, you see this and
Hey,
it
young
realizes,
listeners,
well,
coming at you from the studio. My name is Drew too, and I'm Jose Legit. So, yeah, this is our podcast. It's good to see you, man. Yeah, good to see you too, man. Good to see you in the studio. Yeah, good to see you in the studio where we are. So, today we're here to talk about United States history. That's right. Yeah. So, as you know, I'm one of the founding fathers. And I've been thinking, what should I put in my new amazing project, the Constitution? Oh, man, great question, Bay. Maybe something about the housing of soldiers in civilian homes during peacetime. Yo, great idea for peacetime, Bay.
What? Why are they calling each other they? Because they're friends. See? When it's conversation, it's so much easier to understand. Let's try a science one.
Jose, you know what I was wondering in my head? What? What do plants eat if it's not like burgers? Thank you for asking me that.
so I am aware of the silliness of it all and maybe wasting time and things like that. I think Storm does generate some nice, really interesting articles it can for you and links. I am not really sure with the Google LM what it generates, but it does lead for kind of, in a sense, great fodder for Saturday Night Live. But I am playing and seeing what it can generate and think about what students can do with it. But my early steps, I was definitely off the edge of the map a little bit. The first one I did, I was playing with, I've had some background in working with D-Day, and I asked Chatty Jeeps to create a realistic series of photo-like images of the storming of Omaha Beach, focusing on the 116th Infantry 29th Division, and they were supposed to represent it looking like Robert Capa. And I left it like that. And this was the picture that they created that you can see there. It says, here's the image depicting the storming of Omaha Beach. I've just gendered Chatty Jeeps, damn it. Capturing the intense and chaotic atmosphere of the 116th Infantry Division. And I said, please, can you explain what is going on in this photo? And it talks about the landing scene, the chaos and the smoke. It talks about the soldiers' appearances of looking wet, the emotions on the faces. Keep looking at the picture. It captures the overcast skies, and it talks about some historical inaccuracies. Now, I'm looking at that and going, that's awful. It actually looks more like Dunkirk. They're all escaping. They're all running off the beach, and you don't see any faces. So I said, it looks like the soldiers are walking into the sea and not onto the beach, and you cannot see any faces. Could you improve on the image to make it more realistic? And he created this image. And he says, here's an update. They said, here's an updated image. The soldiers are now emerging from the landing craft. And I said, thank you. May I ask where you got the image from? Because I was like, I know that image. I've seen it somewhere. And so while it is a kind of representation, it's actually a well-known image that was actually another photograph. And so I was really kind of struck by the fact that it reached out and pulled another photo that was done from the time. And it did leave me wondering, you know, when Chatty Jeeps hears and gets information, is that really what our students are seeing when we describe or misrepresent the past? So I was really concerned with some misrepresentations, but then how it actually went and did find something, but it developed, it almost mirrored an actual image. It didn't create a new one. My other big concern is the character AI. And you get things like this, you know, come and speak to a historian from the past, hello history type of thing. And my mate Ben said about that one, this free 20-page e-booklet is dropping tomorrow, a new AI prompt framework that brings to life historical and literary figures. And Ben wrote, I'm going to guess that it will be pretty shit, but let's see. Anyway, so my mate Jeremy actually did play with one of these, and you start to realize that it is pretty scary when you're talking to Anne Frank and what you put in and what you get back. And so I think in terms of history education, I think this is very uncomfortable. And, you know, I've spoken with many people who lived through and witnessed the Holocaust who have told me what they saw and experienced. They told me about many of the horrible things. And this is a bit fuzzy, but my mate Alan also then got onto it. And this is where you really start to worry about what it's training on. I would love to be an author when I grow up. So Alan asked, what were your career aspirations? I would love to be an author when I grow up. I absolutely love to write. I love writing stories that make people laugh, cry, or think. I know it's a lot of work, but it's fun for me. I think a job would be a good way to combine doing what I love, writing, and making money. My biggest inspiration is J.K. Rowling's, because I feel like we really share the same values. So I think in history education, when we're giving stuff out to students and this is what they get in, we've got some really concerns. And again, I'm picking on Holocaust as a subject, but this sense of what AI can gender, and you think you're having access, and it is very, very worrying as you go. While in 2023, Rolling Stone was talking about historical figures, you can talk to famous people to lie to you, it's still continuing, but now it's made it into the schools, because this is from January 19th, 2025, and schools are using AI emulation of Anne Frank. And it was telling kids, in a sense, well, we don't want to, the Holocaust. Yeah, you don't want to blame everyone. It's not everyone's to blame. So I do worry in history education that there are some major, major concerns about the risks that are going on here. And so to quote Andre 3000, some people might think it's really, really good, and roses smell like poo-poo. So you might think, but yeah, we've got to be really, really, really careful with what we're doing, and we have to help students recognize that the idea of just taking for granted what's there, asking historical figures from the past, it misses the point. I'm going to transition really quickly to talk about prompts as conversation starters to support historical and Gen AI literacy, and think about this idea of a dialogue. A partner that admits they're wrong when called out, but won't ever call you out either, so that's kind of nice. These basic prompts, you can add context to prompts. There's some nice stuff out there with regard to building prompts. MIT's got some. You also have stuff from OpenAI, and Anthropic have got kind of things for prompt engineering, good ways to start. Ethan Molick kind of says, you can really focus on the prompt, and this is something that you've got to take control of. Think about the role that you're taking. Think about the constraints. Think about step-by-step instructions, kind of thing. If you then talk about the goal and what you want. I often also say in the prompts, I say, when I've started writing a prompt, I go, can you repeat back to me what you think I've asked for? And can you also take your time when generating this, please? I always say please, because when they take over. And so I took one of Ethan Molick's prompts, a very detailed one, and I tried to start thinking about it being a tutor. So I took a prompt from the spell book and said, you are a friendly, helpful tutor. Your job is to explain a concept to a user in a clear and straightforward way. Give the user an analogy. Make sure the explanations is simple. First, introduce yourself and let the user know that you'll ask them a couple of questions about themselves. Do this, do this. And so I tried to be very, very specific about what I wanted it to do when I was trying to prompt and become a kind of history educator mentor. And so I started seeing the prompts as the way into scaffolding history, encouraging questions and helping with analysis and helping them think them through. I wanted it to help make connections, to revisit evidence, and to maybe in a low stakes way, give them guiding questions and check things as they go. So I wanted to be this conversational mentor. I see it as helping to process information. You can work with, help develop questioning techniques and model and scaffold critical thinking. You can have a dialogue and help you explain things. And I've tried to start playing that way with history education, a much more controlled space. Now, what you've got in the Google Drive is I've created a prompt starter kit that I often give and will give to students. I give to students. So these are prompts that you can type in and see what results. And there's about 60 different prompts, and they're all around history education. Some of them are about scaffolds I've worked with, but you could just replace them with different scaffolds that you use to support working with historical sources. There's things about significance. There's things about evidence-based writing. And it's a way to get my teacher educators to think about what it can do. and to look at it and see what happens. From there, the next challenge is building your own prompts. So the challenge is ask AI to do this. Can you get it to do things? Can you ask it to get it to analyze the significance of a historical figure? Can we use the rich protocol to understand the significance of a historical source? And then you write the prompt and see what it comes back with. So, and then part of it is then spending time with the students, kind of evaluating the quality of that relationship that you're trying to build with the prompt and the AI. Is the AI response good, bad? Is it surprising? Is it effective? Is it supporting student learning? Will it challenge the student? Can it set up, is it meeting your expectations and goals? So often we'll have a chart like this, and it's the prompt. What did the AI do well? What was missing? How might this support your teaching? How might it support learning? What adaptations to the prompt would you do or throw away? So when we're playing with prompts, I'm trying to say that the concept of prompt engineering and history education is maybe where we start to control some of the noise and the mess that's going on. And like I said, I'm really focusing much more on concepts of historical literacy and working well with second order concepts. So a lot of the scaffolds that I've done to support kind of historical inquiry become important. So my knowledge of history is based on basically Schools Council History Project. I was a student doing that in the 80s. I know I look so young. And probably my knowledge has not improved much after the Schools Council History Project, because I think it was kind of, it's a brilliant curriculum and still is. And so I spend a lot of time with tools such as the Rich, such as SkimC, to help students work with sources, ask questions, work with sources, make evidence-based claims. Claim evidence reasoning, the Rich protocol, reason for, how does a historian make sense or see a source as useful? Well, does the source reveal reasons for the events or developments? Does it provide impact? Does it give any sense of changes which took place or how things worked out? Again, my mate Ben. And so I started working into going to ChatGPT, and I would drop a source in. So here's source C, and it talks about it gives you the source. And then I kind of said, please read this historical source, and explain why it would be useful to a historian. And it kind of lays it out. And then I said, do you think the Rich process, would help us understand this more and what's better about it? And so I'm trying to then I tried to train it to use ways in, and to think about how it could demonstrate historical thinking for me. And that's when I started realizing there's a thing called custom GPTs. Now, I will say, I do see Katrina wrote, Notebook LM is blocked. We have a lot of stuff blocked at Tech. And what I'm also doing is I do pay for ChatGPT and I pay for Claude. Virginia Tech now has just started letting people use ChatGPT itself as a process. So I understand that there's a lot of people who are still not using things. But when I paid for ChatGPT, I can create a custom GPT that's not just out there and you don't just put things in. And a custom GPT is basically something that I can control. And this is where I built the scaffolding historical thinking mentor. And I gave it and what you do is you built it, and then I kept adding in data and materials. And I basically added in articles I'd written, materials that I've got all around historical thinking. And then it produced the scaffolding historical thinking mentor that I've been trying to play with. I also have another one as well. So my goal is to have this, in a sense, AI as a tutor for history, playing with prompts, customizing ChatGPT, and letting them know who I am, what I'm interested in, and what I'm wanting it to happen. Now, the normal chat, it's a general model knowledge. Custom ChatGPT, I tailor the data and the instructions. It still can reach out to its training data, but I've given it more stuff to handle. It operates based solely on my custom configurations, so sometimes it ignores them. It tries to be consistent and kind of always focus. When you go back for another conversation, it kind of remembers where you're at and remembers that you're trying to work with historical sources type of thing. So if you remember, I basically went to Ethan Molick And then this is what I then went and asked ChatGPT how to improve my source. So this is the improved prompt for historical inquiry and analysis. And so it really kind of started laying out, helped me improve the prompt and put that into GPT. And I was very specific about what I wanted again. And here's the scaffolding one, and you can see all the things I've put in. I had an article in research in practice. I've put other articles in that are mine. I've put the C3 framework in. I put rich analysis. I put some stuff from Historical Association England in, the wisdom source to evidence. But it's in here. It doesn't join the training anywhere else. It stays within my chat. I give it instructions, and then these are the prompts. When you see the prompts, it's welcome. I'm here to help you analyze a source. Can you tell me about your learning level? Please share your source work. Would you like feedback? And I was so excited. And you can look at it. You've got a link there or a little swirly thing. I forgot the name now. QR code. So I was so excited about it. I sent it to some of the people who were in my TLOS AI thing. I said, look at this. I've got this. And so Quinn, one of my friends, well, again, I don't have friends. Anyway, he wrote back and said, thanks for sharing. This is really interesting. But it didn't really guide me as a learner, though, through the document. And it complete all the 5 steps in one fell swoop. In other words, it did the work for me rather than prompting me to do it. I wonder if you might be able to tweak the instructions a little for force to pose questions and evaluate learners' responses and prevent it from doing its own analysis. And I was like, damn it, I'd asked it to, but it just can't help itself. It's like that sexy little intern who wants to do it for you. And then Paul, my mate Paul, and you can see I shared it with him, and he's a history professor. And he had the same thing. It kind of did it for him. He said, if overall AI is C work, your little bot is performing at a B level, in my opinion. And then it's the idea, I imagine something like a conversation in a faculty member's office where they asked the student progressively deeper questions. It wasn't giving me or them what we were hoping for. At the same time, I was using Ben's stuff, and I started just to see, would it actually be able to react to things? So here's a very short extract from a diary, and it engages in the rich analysis this time. So it was directly focused. And I often ask it, could you do a rich analysis with a primary source and then kind of annotate what you did well? So I'm just seeing if I can actually get it to do stuff for me anyway. So what reasons does the source provide? And then it gives an annotation of what it thinks it did, why it was worthwhile. So reason, impact, change, how, and each time I'm asking it, explain your answers, with the goal that maybe students might start using these at some point. So then I took some historical sources that I have, and I said, if I provide you with a source, can you demonstrate and explain how to analyze a source, please? So I'm wanting it to demonstrate and then explain it. So that's the idea of, this thinking aloud. So source from World War II, let's analyze the source you provided using Skim-C. So it automatically went to Skim-C. What to do? Begin summarizing the basic content. Here's a summary. Contextualize what to do. Place the source within its broader historical context. Consider the time period. Here is an example. Infer. So at this moment, I'm just testing it. And then I asked it, is it useful, this source? How would it be useful? And again, I'm trying to use the things I would do in class with Rich and with Skim-C and seeing if it can actually give some decent answers and what it can help me with. So it's like baby steps in, talking with it and having discussions and conversations, co-intelligence. I was also intrigued, and this comes from some work I did with the Library of Congress and Anne Canning and a whole gang and Sarah and people, and John Lee. I have a newspaper, this is from the Chronicle in America, Library of Congress, and I took the front page of the Times, and the question I asked was, here's a source, please focus on the cartoon and relevant articles, and then get it to skim. And it actually could focus in. And this is where I'm trying to test what it can do again. So summarize, what type of historical source is it? So now it's asking the questions, what specific information? The cartoon tallies go way back. And it starts to go through and detail. Again, I'm just testing what it can get out and where it can focus and what it can offer me in terms of a model. Can you explain a model for a student, how you managed to do this analysis, please? What are the key steps a student should do? So imagine the prompt would be, hey, can you explain to me how you did this? You're working with this source. So it says, certainly, I'll break down the process of how I analyze the source. Summarize what to do, and here's the example. I started by noting the source was a political cartoon. I noticed this. I contextualized. I did this. It's not very deep, but it is actually lingering with the source and moving through the source. I then asked it, I am not sure if you are able to find this out based on your training, but if I told you that the phrase go way back that is in the cartoon may well originate from popular culture song saying from 1901, yeah, I'm not a good writer, clearly. Would you be able to find the provenance of the term in the cartoon? Take your time. And it went back. So it's trying to contextualize. It went back. It talked about vaudeville minstrel shows, ragtime music, colloquial saying. And I didn't know this for a long time, but it took quite a few years for us to work out that go way back is actually a minstrel song. And there is a recording of that in the Library of Congress. And so this idea of conclusion, if you are researching this phrase, I recommend starting with the Library of Congress's archives, which include extensive collections of early 20th century sheet music. That's one of those moments when I went, well, yeah, that's different from the Anne Frank comment about wanting to be J.K. Rowling. I also gave it some kind of propaganda, and this is where I've suddenly started moving a little bit. I say, can you analyze this source using a scaffold? This time, can you make sure that you ask me questions to help me analyze the source? So certainly, let's analyze the source. Let's start by getting a basic understanding of what the source is about. Question, what do you see in this image? Can you describe the main elements, such as text? Now, I'm lazy, and I decided I couldn't be about to answer every single one immediately, but you can see it's starting to give me questions. And I just started going at the end, it looks like some type of flyer, but I was happy that all of a sudden it's starting to ask me the questions. It's not willingly going, oh, look, it's a Stuka. Oh, what's going on here? This is the idea. I'll go back, moving quickly. So I started to now play with it a little bit more. And then I got another source, and it was a letter. So I'll just show you this.
Here is a letter from Alexander Leslie. It was a report back to England with regard in the Tea Party from the National Archives in England. I went into the historic scaffolding history thinking mentor, and the response was, welcome, I'm here to help you analyze historical sources. What would you like to learn today? And what I did was I actually dropped in the original first. And I said, yes, I have a source and would like you to first to use the rich framework to help me understand the value of this source. I have a transcript, but I'm going to give you the original. And it really kind of struggled. It talks about what it's going to do with the rich framework, but can you make out anything from the source? It has some general notes that it's trying to pull together. So, which I found was interesting because it's not easy to read it by any standard. And so it did that. So eventually I dropped the straight transcript in for them. And thank you for providing that. Let's apply the rich framework step by step to answer the historical value of this letter. I'll model how you can use this protocol effectively as a historian. And it kind of goes through the reasons for event or development. What does this source reveal? Evidence, so it pulls out the evidence to help me understand that. Impact of the event, this demonstrates again, so it's explaining what they're gaining when you're looking at the impact of the event, changes which took place. These statements suggest a significant erosion of British control, how things worked, it gives insights there. Reflection, this letter is highly valuable for historians for multiple reasons. Can you walk me through a source analysis, please, so I can do a deeper read of this source? Please use Skim C to prompt. Absolutely. Summarizing questions to consider. And then it gives me a model response. This source is a letter, goes through your turn. What other details stand out to you in the summary phase? And I can respond if I had any gumption or desire and wasn't a lazy bastard. Contextualizing, it gives a model response. How does the timing and location influence what Leslie's reporting? My turn, the question comes to me. Inferring, some model responses. Your turn. What other attitudes are unstated ideas can you infer from Leslie's language? Monitoring. Here you go. What other questions or gaps in the source knowledge stand out to you after they've gone through? So again, it is asking questions. I did ask it to model, and then it gives me a chance to participate a little bit. And then it gives a final reflection. I wrote, in terms of inquiry, what historical questions does this source open up for me? What would be a good inquiry question? And then it offers, how did British officials perceive the Boston Tea Party and how did these perceptions shape their responses? Why it's a good one. And you can see it offers up a couple of other ones as well to think about learning to ask good historical questions and model them in a sense. How to choose the best inquiry question. A strong inquiry question would be open-ended, critical, specific enough, and be grounded in sources.
So the next thing I did after that, I decided to actually analyze one myself and not be so lazy, and I gave it a letter from the Great Depression.
Bobby Murray, and it is a letter that's said during the Great Depression. It's letters to Mrs. Roosevelt kind of thing. And so I had written an analysis of this up. And so I had an analysis using SkimC of like, what can I learn and what was children's lives like during the Great Depression. So I went to the Scaffolding Historical Thinking Mentor. And, you know, when I hit a button, it says, please share your source or work with me. What do you need from this session? So it says, thank you for sharing these documents. How can I support you in the exploration of historical thinking today? For instance, would you like this, this, and this? So I dropped it in the letter that I was using. And I said, hi, I'm trying to use Skim to analyze a letter and would like your help and feedback based on our ongoing analysis. It would be great if you could support my letter. So it tells me what you think Skim is. And then, would you like first to start with summarizing? If so, share your observations. So then I shared the first piece of evidence available from the source is the source type. This is a letter. At this point, it says read the letter. And so I start going through a Skim and saying what it says. As you can see there, great start. You're doing very well. You're doing well by identifying key details. Here's some feedback and a few points. What's strong in your analysis? Source identification, doing well. Author details, audience purpose, suggestions for strength. Expand on some of the details. What specific evidence that shows Bobby's situation is urgent. Mention Bobby's tone and phrasing, purpose and context. Follow-up questions. Would you like to move on to contextualizing? So I'll drop that in. What's my strengths? Broader context. You correctly identify broader context. You talk about local, things for refinement. Consider mentioning, and it's again assuming that I know things about the wider world, but it's triggering me in a discussion of things to think about and look up when I'm contextualizing, questions to consider. Then we go into inferring. Would you like to move on to inferring? Yes. And so I kind of say the author seems sensitive to his mother's workload and blah, blah, blah. Strengths of your inference. And good. I talk about maturity, financial, shifts in perspective, suggestions, some romantic questions. You raised excellent questions about Bobby's father, his sister. Further speculating further, could these absences indicate a family's instability? Government trust. This must be his trust. Why? Limited details on the local context. So to refine that, questions to push your thinking further. What does Bobby think? So there's a lot of stuff that keeps happening back and forth in this type of thing, and I keep dropping in things as you go. Here is my quick full evaluation of the letter. I cannot corroborate as I have no others. And then based on my full letter, it kind of has some inquiry questions that I could further go into. This letter sets up several compelling avenues. Using the rich, evaluate what is usefulness. So it kind of offers up me some ideas to extend, gives me a little bit of feedback as we go.
So I think I'm making some inroads a little bit. And then what's happened recently is that Chatty Jeeps can now actually see as well as just like physically see. And I want to show you this.
Hello. I was just wondering what you can see now.
Hello, I see a book titled Virginia, History, Government, Geography, with an illustration on the cover. It appears to feature historical imagery related to Virginia. Is there something specific you'd like to know or discuss about it?
I'm interested in learning a little bit about what you see and the date and things like that, and your reactions to this book as a history mentor. So here, can you see anything about the date or when it was created?
From what I can see, The book looks like an older publication, possibly from the mid-20th century. The title page mentions the Virginia State Board of Education and a date of 1957. This suggests it's likely a historical educational text used in Virginia schools. As a history mentor, it would be interesting to explore how the content reflects the educational standards and perspectives of that time period.
That's a great idea. And in fact, I want you to look at this, and I want to understand what you think about the subject and discussion going on here, and what kind of insights does it give you about how Virginia history is taught in the 1950s?
This section appears to discuss early Virginia history, focusing on interactions between European settlers and indigenous peoples. The illustrations and text likely reflect the educational norms and perspectives of the 1950s, emphasizing certain narratives. This offers
Could you talk about what do you mean by certain narratives? Can you explain that, please? And I'll show you another page.
Certainly. By certain narratives, I mean that historical accounts can sometimes reflect the values and perspectives of the time they were written, potentially emphasizing certain viewpoints while overlooking others. For example, the depiction of colonization or interactions with indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans might be presented from a more Eurocentric perspective, which was common in textbooks from that era. This can shape how history is taught and understood, highlighting the importance of critically evaluating sources and seeking multiple perspectives.
How can I talk to children about the language used in here, and what does that reflect where it says how the Negroes lived under slavery? How do you explain this to kids, and if this textbook is worthwhile or of any use whatsoever to a history class today?
Explaining this language to children involves providing historical context. You could discuss how language and perspectives on race have evolved, emphasizing that terms like Negro are outdated and now considered offensive. It's important to highlight the harm caused by slavery and ensure the discussion is age-appropriate and sensitive. This textbook could serve as a tool to show how historical narratives were presented in the past, offering a chance to critically assess and discuss changes in understanding and representation. It can be a valuable resource if used to promote critical thinking and discussions about how history is recorded and taught.
So could you also tell me, the difference between a secondary source and a primary source? Is this then a secondary source or a primary source? What would make it a secondary, or what would make it a primary source?
Certainly. A primary source is an original document or artifact created during the time under study, such as letters, photographs, or artifacts. A secondary source interprets or analyzes primary sources, often created by someone who did not experience the events firsthand. This textbook is a secondary source because it interprets and presents historical events rather than being a direct account from the period it describes. Understanding this helps students distinguish between original records and later interpretations.
How could I make this a primary source? What questions would I have to ask to make this a primary source?
To transform this textbook into a primary source, you would shift focus from using it as a source of historical content to studying it as an artifact. This involves asking questions like, when was it written? Who wrote it and why? What were the societal attitudes and educational norms at the time? What biases or perspectives does it reflect? By analysing it as a product of its time, it becomes a primary source for studying mid-20th century educational practices and societal views.
So I tried to record that on my phone, and it couldn't record it because it's a third-party app. So I had my daughter, the 14-year-old, videotape that. And then I thought, oh, this is a perfect chance to see if she's actually learned something about what she did, and said, so Fiona, what did you learn by that? And she goes, I've just lost 5 minutes of my life. You owe me $20 and I'm going to go back and watch Abbott Elementary. So again, the learning's out, but I did like what was being generated. I'm going to move on to one quickly here. This
historical thinking
mentor. Again, Scaffolding History Thinking Mentor. One of my former students, Rachel Whiteley, in Virginia now. They're doing a lot of performance-based assessments. And so she provided me with some model essays to look at. And now we're moving into, can it start giving feedback? The office wants to do a source analysis, but I wanted to see if it could give me feedback based on a rubric.
Is help with feedback on essays. And these are from my a former alumni and a colleague who had some student essays. They were looking at who benefited. The question was who benefited and who was at a disadvantage as a result of European colonialism. This is one of those performance assessments at the division level that they have to give 3 of those. And there is a rubric that you can see the essays, and they were using these essays as a way to kind of grade and also let students see what a good essay was, what a weak essay was as well. But it's really for the teachers to go through. So Chatty Jeeps, would you like feedback on your analysis? Let's see how you're using the scaffolds. So I hit that button. Now it's focused on skim C scaffolds, but I wanted it just to give me feedback on the essays. So I dropped in the rubric first. I have an essay I've drafted on colonialism, pretending to be a student. The inquiry question was who benefited. As you know, I am going to put in the rubric, and then I would like your advice, David Lenspell, on how best to improve my essay in light of the rubric. I have a packet of sources I use, and I can go back to them if needed. Thanks for sharing. It's kind of looking at the nature of what's being graded, repeating what's pretty much in the rubric itself. And I drop in the first essay. Thank you for sharing. And it goes through some of the strengths, and then it offers some areas of improvement and suggestions on what I could work on. Very, very specific. Information from sources, explain connections. And again, you can see how that's connecting directly with what's in the rubric, as well as clarity organization. So it gives me some specific suggestions on how I can improve. Now, kids could cheat, yes. But this to me is a conversation about how to improve the work I've already done and to make it stronger, and to give me models, which is what a teacher should be helping a student do. I then dropped in another essay, different quality, and strengths again, areas of things that needed to be improved on, what I've got currently, what is suggested to help me write the thesis, different perspectives. This was a weaker essay, and then actionable items that I should work on the thesis, work on the sources, work on different perspectives and improve classroom structure. So you can see it's another way of trying to, if I'm thinking about self-regulated learning and going in and having a conversation, again, co-intelligence, having a conversation about work I've already done.
I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time there focusing on kind of working with sources, and I think that's a kind of quite an American thing at the moment, teaching with inquiry. But I also interested in other kind of core concepts. Significance, causation, chronology. So another thing I did was I created a separate mentor. I'm not sure I really needed to, but I wanted to kind of see how it worked with some other second order concepts. What I did here is I dropped in overviews of core concepts, wisdom of historical thinking, wisdom on causation. I've done some stuff on significance myself. I dropped in Arthur Chapman's story of Alphonse the Camel, and I kind of populated it with, I often use cards, like pick a card and now categorize and things like that. So I dropped it in, I gave instructions. These are the conversation starters. How do you think social and economic factors played a role? Which event in this period is most significant? So that was some more experimenting I did. And it's got some errors because the 5R model is not Satius and Morton. It's really kind of Christine Council's model. And first I would say, can you introduce me to how I could model significance to talk about past events and people? I want to learn about the criteria I can use. So it started to generate different models of that kind of put in. It didn't always resonate directly with the people, and I think it got a bit confused on certain ones. But each one of these models that are talking about impact in different ways, I think is quite powerful, because students don't know how to talk about significance, and we rarely teach them how to talk about significance. So having these models in, I think, was worthwhile. Can you develop a causation chart or map of the cause of the French Revolution and highlight the long-term and short-term causes as well as trigger? And so it started generating trigger causes and things like that, and then built a little map, though it's not great, and there's some teaching notes. So again, what I'm trying to do is just see what it can do. How can I visualize a timeline? Can you help me out? Type of thing. It's not very good at visuals, but it did talk about things like trading cards and things like that. I talked about a diamond 9, and then I asked it to apply a diamond 9 in terms of causes around the French Revolution. I also asked it about the anatomy of a revolution and kind of Crane Brinton's anatomy of a revolution and things like that. So I'm seeing what it can do and how it can help students understand and help me talk about causation, chronology, and things like that. I also am very interested in kind of historical questions, and some of the work I've done with what's called the question formulation technique when I've been working with the Library of Congress and Waynesburg University and the group called the Right Question Institute is a way of getting kids to ask questions, historical inquiries. And so this is what you're going to see next. Hello there. Right, I am wanting you to help me model what's called the QFT, question formulation technique for students who are studying history. I have a question focus from the Library of Congress that is there. It is actually the image that I'm really interested in, the photo. And we have some rules for producing questions. They are ask as many as you can, do not stop to judge or discuss, collect them all, write them down, and make any statement you make into a question. And I want you to look at this image and take it from a very kind of discipline-specific perspective and start to generate, based on this question focus, as many questions that you have of this primary source. So we're going to do that first, with the goal of ultimately developing maybe one or two questions that are historically specific that we can then explore in an inquiry. So are you ready?
Absolutely. The QFT is a great approach for historical inquiry. Let's look at the image and generate questions from a historian's perspective.
Great. Off you go. Brainstorm as much as possible. Generate the questions you can. Go.
All right, let's dive in. Looking at this image, some questions come to mind. 1. What event is taking place in this photo? 2. Who are the people in the image and what are their roles? 3. What emotions are these children expressing and why? 4. What historical context might explain this scene? 5. What can we infer about the time period from the clothing and setting? 6. What might have happened before and after this photo was taken? These questions can help us delve deeper into the historical significance of the image. Would you like to explore any of these further?
Great. No, the next thing I want you to do is take a look now, because this is what it says in the Library of Congress. Can you generate more questions based on what's said here now? So again, I just want questions to start with.
Certainly. With the context provided by the Library of Congress, here are more questions. Why was the Horace Baker family the first African-American family to move into Delmar Village? 2. What challenges did the Baker family face during this move? 3. What was the reaction of the community to their arrival? 4. How does this event reflect broader social issues of the time? 5. What was the significance of this neighborhood integration? 6. How did the demonstrations by whites influence local policies or sentiments? These questions can guide a deeper understanding of the historical context. Would you like to explore any of these further?
I want you now to tell me prioritize. I want you to tell me the top 2 questions that you think would be a worthwhile inquiry. And yeah, tell me the top 2 questions that you like from that list.
For a worthwhile inquiry, I'd prioritize these 2 questions. 1. What challenges did the Baker family face during this move? This question delves into the personal experiences and broader societal issues, offering rich material for historical analysis. How does this event reflect broader social issues of the time? This encourages students to connect this specific event to larger historical trends and movements, fostering a deeper understanding of the period. Do these align with your goals for the inquiry?
Yeah, that sounds really good. Where could I find sources to help support that?
To support this inquiry, you can start with primary sources from the Library of Congress, such as newspaper articles, photographs, and personal accounts from that period. Additionally, historical databases like JSTOR or Project Muse can provide academic articles and secondary sources. You might also find relevant books on the civil rights movement and community integration. If you have access to a university library, they can be a great resource as well.
Great, thank you. And then another thing I've been playing with, and this was care of my mate Ben. There's a false dichotomy between is the idea of knowledge is important. And so this concept of like a knowledge organizer, I often use frames to kind of have some content for kids to walk through, and then in a sense, have them review material. So, you know, it's not just all skills, content matters, and how they come together. So I tried to use the historical mentor to help me review some content based on like a knowledge organizer, and I stole these off my mate Ben. Either knowledge or skill, and going through all the material, and then we never have time to do the skill bit of the primary sources. And I was just using air quotes. So I often suggest that we use things like this, which is a knowledge organizer that the students get. The materials are there, and then we work with them in different ways. And so here's an example of one that we work with. You see aim, structure, key dates, vocab, and then we can build from that really quickly, and that can be like a cheat sheet for them to get some context. Here's the one I dropped in. It's basically looking at First and Second World War and things that shaped the UK at the time. And we've got vocab and literally chronology in this one, that's all. Here's a knowledge organizer that has vocab and also chronology that looks at the impact of Britain on World War I and World War II. Can you help me with a couple of things to review this? Because what is on the other piece of this is normally a series of questions like, what's the vocab? What are some dates? Where did things happen? How did things connect? So this is the history mentor. So based on the knowledge organizer you've shared, it contains valuable information about the vocabulary and chronology of Britain's involvement in World War I and World War II. How would you like to proceed? Here are the options. Vocabulary review. Would you like to help understanding key terms? Chronology analysis. Do you want to focus on creating a timeline? Should we explore cause and effect? Themes or concepts? Interactive activities? Could you first help me with vocab review? Great. Here's a breakdown of some key terms with examples of their application. So what it's doing there is kind of giving me a little bit about application. I could have been more specific, I think, and asked for it to test me on it immediately, kind of thing. But it's kind of extending how things connect there, just the same with World War I. Discussion questions then for me to answer. How did trench warfare and artillery influence the outcomes of battle? So based on what's there, what connections can you see between the policies of appeasement and the outbreak of World War I? In what ways did ration evacuation reflect a total war? And that kind of links then with some of the language and materials that are mentioned in both the chronology and in the lesson itself. Can you help me understand some turning points in the timeline, please, and explain how certain events are connected or connect? World War I turning points. It goes through the ones that are mentioned in there. Turning points in World War II. Key connections across the war. War as total war, total appeasement. And then questions for understanding. How did the outcome of World War I shape the decisions made during the lead up to World War II? What would a causation web look like? Causation web, and then it kind of explains steps to build a causation web, what I need to do to make that happen. And then here's an example of a causation web with a central node. It doesn't really do the pictures at all, but it kind of connects, runs through. Can you help me make some significance cards for some of these events? Yes, using the 5 R's of Seixas and Morton, which is wrong. I don't think it is. That's not Morton's, Seixas and Morton's model, but it is a model that we've used before. So it looks at the significance, remarkable, remembered, resulted in change, resonant, and revealing. So that's one way of talking about significance as a model. But with the song, why is it remarkable? Why is it remembered? How did it result in change? What was resonant? And so we're interacting with the content in different ways, and now we're describing significance. It could be done in a lesson, but if you imagine you're working back and forth with these discussions and prompts, with students, that could work. Based on the document, can you test some of my knowledge, please, with some questions and activities, and help me if I get the answers wrong? So, knowledge questions, definition and context. What is trench warfare, and how did it find combat? What was the defense of the realm? And then I would write these in, kind of thing. So causation, task, match the events below to their categories, social, political, and economic. I would do them, and then I would ask, let's try, would you like to start with the questions and activities or both? I'll provide feedback as we go. So again, it's trying to give you feedback. It's giving you some of the second order concepts, but I think the idea is a false dichotomy between every. There's also the concept of like a knowledge wardrobe. And it's the idea of being able to categorize. I often do that in cards, like separate these out. And so I asked it to, can you help model for me how I best can complete this assignment, where they go through and use and do this kind of categorization and then start to make claims and evidence based on it. And it walked me through ideas on how to do that. So I've been playing with it in that way as well.
Help them.
The other thing I did recently,
IDM, a book.
in the States, we do use a thing called the inquiry development. The IDM, the inquiry. I've just forgot it. I've blanked out. But it's a lesson plan, and it uses a primary source. It uses sources, and there's a question. And I went in and asked it to help me align as a teacher. Does this inquiry design model? Yes, remember now. Does it actually make sense, and does it flow, and what else can I do about it? So I wanted to show it trying to support some of my work.
A IDM, a Booker T inquiry IDM, which is here, was President Theodore Roosevelt's invitation to Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House a good idea? And there's supporting questions, tasks, and then a number of sources. And the summative task is, using the evidence you've gathered through Skim C, craft a response to the compelling question. As you look down, I have an introduction. I also then have the sources. And they're still relatively long sources. There's limited text, but they're not as long as many IDMs. Newspapers, speeches. A lot of this is newspapers because it's based on the Library of Congress, TPS group, focusing on newspapers themselves. And I asked the scaffolding historical thinking mentor, she's completed an inquiry design model. Please take a look at the IDM as a historical thinking mentor. Does the compelling question and supporting questions align with the sources provided? How could I improve the question to make them more disciplined in terms of how historians would ask questions? Or are they okay for students? Can you also suggest scaffolds to help students unpack the sources? Please, gosh, my spelling. What do I need to do so they do not feel overwhelmed? I also have a number of ELL students in my class, and so if you know of ways I can support them analysing the sources and making evidence-based claims, please let me know. So it takes a look, ChatGPT takes a look and goes through. It talks about the compelling question asked this, engaging student-friendly. If I want to take historians often focus on broader analytical, it gave a suggestion here. This framing introduces broad historical themes like racial politics, political symbolism. The supporting questions I have are here. These align well with the compelling question and sources, but could be slightly reworded, so they often be some rewords. It then also aligns the sources with the questions. And then it suggests ensure students understand each source's context and intended audience, pair each source. In terms of scaffolding, they might feel overwhelmed by the quantity and complexity, which is a problem with typical IDMs. So chunking the Skim C method, moving slowly. Rich analysis framework is simple and might help students assess the relevance impact changes. And then it also suggests vocabulary walls, visual supports for students, and differentiation. It also then gives some suggestions for ELL students. It said, would you like any more help in bioscaffolds? I said, thank you. Based on the inquiry itself, could you provide a model essay for students that clearly show how to make evidence-based claims from the sources while also making sure the guiding question is answered? Can you annotate the essay to highlight why it is a strong argumentative essay focused on making evidence-based claims? Certainly. Was Theodore Roosevelt's invitation a good idea? It lays out an essay, and if you notice here, we do see annotations as you go. Annotations, and you also see it's referring to sources in there. It tells me why the essay is strong. Would you like me to create a student-friendly annotated version of this essay with guiding questions for analysis? Please let me know. And I wrote, well, great, but could you also provide a response that is a weak and annotated missed opportunities to write a strong historical essay? So here's your strong essay with student annotations, and then you have questions. Does your introduction clearly state your argument and outline the evidence you'll see? Annotation again. Does your paragraph use evidence to explain the motivations? It explains why this is good. It gives an annotation to the paragraph, and then also, why is this good? And it goes through and then ends with a conclusion. Then we move into a weak essay. The introduction lacks depth. It restates the question without a clear thesis or specific evidence. Explain why this event mattered in the broader context of race relations on President Roosevelt's presidency. But you can see what's happening here. It's giving me options, it's giving me models, and it's also asking questions to build on. Now I want to make sure that we have some supports for ELL students. So we have some general scaffolds, historical evidence table, sentence starters, and then we have some more scaffolds laid out for ELL students. Then it also produced some writing scaffolds for ELL students using Peel, point, evidence, explain, and link. And a checklist for success. Some more then additional supports. And then it offered me some graphic organizers, so I did ask if it could help me some graphic organizers for the table. So here.
So I think you get the idea of some of the work I've been doing. This is my final one I'm going to show you. There's lots more of play, but I think this is an interesting one. It may not be interesting. Maybe I'm just a geek. I should just do TikTok instead. But what we've got here is a report's just come out, and it dealt with all the kind of concern about the critical race theory being taught. And it was a study done by the AHA called America's Lesson Plan. And they offered a sweeping study of the state of the teaching of the US. And then I was focusing on a very specific aspect of this, and I wanted some feedback generally from ChatGPT. So stop talking and play this.
Released American Lesson Plan, Teaching US History in Secondary Schools. It's a report about the state of teaching of US history. And there is a section in there that really takes to task the whole concept of compelling questions in many classrooms. And so I dropped in the report into chat. Recently, there have been some very interesting studies that are raising questions with regard to the quality of the actual inquiry-based questions found in social studies, care of the inquiry design model and C3 framework. The AHA released a study on page 102, articulates a series of concerns regarding compelling questions, as well as how sources are used. As a history educator who values history as a disciplinary field, can you explain the AHA's concerns and the article's concerns? Then generate a series of strong questions appropriate for high school students that could serve as exemplars for fellow history educators. Please annotate your questions to reflect the AHA's call for stronger disciplinary questions. Response. AHA raises concerns, and then these are focused in two areas. Lack of depth in compelling questions. Many fail to have disciplinary rigor. Instead of fostering deep historical inquiry, they learn towards moralism, potentially disengage students from meaningful content. We need to, the report suggests these questions often prioritize presentism or moral interpretation over authentic historical investigation. And if you look at some of the IDMs, editorial, they're not wrong. Superficial use of sources. Report notes that while the focus on primary, secondary sources and IDMs and C3 is supposed to be step, there is a tendency to use these superficially. Teachers may emphasize skills, just identify bias without actually diving into the context or causation. So they're actually using more as comprehension exercises. So there's no emphasis for skill or the content, and there's problems with alignment where you have inquiry questions, but they fail to align seamlessly with the primary sources and narratives presented. So what I asked for was questions, so strong exemplary questions. These address the AHA's concern. What were the consequences of Reconstruction era for racial equality in America? Annotation explains more. How did the experience of Indigenous peoples shape the westward expansion? Annotation. And so they offered a number of questions that I do think open up ways to really get to grips with thinking about what do we mean by disciplinary history. There was another article that recently came out. It's different. And so I decided to drop that in to see if it complemented. I didn't expect it to. A recent article in the Journal of Theory and Research in Social Ed published an article, right? The author's concerns with compelling questions are a little different from our colleagues in the HA, but based on your reading of the article, to what extent can the arguments made improve the questions generated here? Or do the arguments simply reinforce the questions already generated? Please revisit your questions and annotations in light of this article. And they went through, pointed out that a lot of this is more about dealing with equities and social justice orientated work, not necessarily the disciplinary aspect. Alignment, inquiry for what the article emphasized the need for compelling questions to name and critique ongoing systems of oppression. So here's some ideas: how did the experience of Indigenous people shape the westward expansion, which is up there, and then what it offers. And it offers some questions again as you go. And so I wanted to kind of show that. Again, then it offered some critique scenarios for growth when we're thinking about questions. And from a historian's perspective, the article emphasizes a justice-oriented inquiry, which is a valuable expansion. However, it risks oversimplifying historical complexities. So with that, there's another way of having a conversation and dialogue. I do think this idea of co-intelligence from Ethan Merlick plays out here and can move you thinking about quality questions within inquiry.
So time's are ticking. I had a couple more that I was going to show, but I think I'm just going to end with, which it feels like now, bloody hell, endless ends. But the idea of recognizing the challenges and importance of trying to be users who are aware of what AI can do and cannot do in history education, as opposed to being unaware. And that's really what I've been challenging myself to do. I'm caught up in my own little world about second order concepts and trying to think about how to do it myself and seeing what it will do, but then how then could it be, I could imagine students at times and setting up activities, not now, but later, for students to actually engage in conversations and pull in different ways. So that's pretty much, yeah, thank you and good night.
All right. Thank you, David. I really appreciate all of the work that you put into preparing this for us, sharing it for us. I know there is a lot here that to unpack, to think about. And as we mentioned at the beginning, you all are going to have access to this presentation, to the videos that are embedded, and you can think about ways that this may be helpful for you, thinking about your teacher education programs, work that you do in classrooms. It is just about 4:30 right now, and I know that many people have to leave or have already had to leave. 90 minutes is a long time, but I know that we're also willing to stay and answer questions. So if I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but if there are any questions and you would like to stay and ask those, we will be happy to stay on and field those.